in the deepest ocean.
We're just like fish out of water. There's two fish that happen upon an older fish. The older fish swims by and says, "Hey boys, how's the water?" Do you know what water is? No. Wait, do you know what water is? No. What? What the hell's water? The issue is that just like fish, we don't know how to describe our own water. It just feels really natural to say like, oh, this is air, this is dirt, this is water.
Water.
Rocks. Just the same way we say like, oh, this is just gonna be wood or concrete. That doesn't work. Right now, in academia and in practice, we're like schools of fish swimming around, but we're swimming in circles.
Just keep swimming, just keep swimming, swimming.
I think the modes of thinking that we have for describing the world, it's all over, boys and girls.
I am under the water. Please help me.
Show's over. We're done. Or we can't think of the world in the same way anymore.
Your eyes, they turn me.
What I mean is, you can't design that way anymore because of climate change. The issue is that in architecture, we kind of just passively deny that climate change is even happening.
By the end of this century, if emissions keep rising, the average temperature on Earth could go up another 4 to 8 degrees. What I'm saying is the planet's a fucking fire. Grow the fuck up. You're not children anymore.
We're just trying to rearrange the deck chairs of the Titanic. It's crazy. It's passive. It's incredibly passive. Sometimes the denial is active, or we just refuse that climate change is an issue. How? We kind of like all agree climate change is happening, right? Or I mean, I guess some people don't, which is crazy. Even if we agree that climate change is happening, some people are not willing to change the way that they practice or change the way that they think about what materials to use. It's a wild business as usual approach that, I mean, you know, like it's easier to imagine the end of the world than the end of capitalism.
You know what's really funny about this?
These guys are fully grown adults.
They're in charge of like everything. They drive cars.
They vote.
They're responsible for the planet. We're doomed.
I mean, also sometimes practitioners, they understand that climate change is going on and they realize it and they try, but it's as if they were like barely keeping their heads above the water. And honestly, it's kind of cringe. They usually try to like find a solution with tech, which, I mean, it doesn't really work, does it?
The prospects for society are turning for the worse. The environment is suffering and might not be reversed.
Tech is the answer, but you didn't even ask the right question to begin with. But you know what? I feel bad for that kind of approach. Not because I am virtue signaling. Kind of difficult to change the entire way that you think about the world. The issue is that our education is inherited by practitioners before us, by architects before us, modernist architects that were incredibly optimistic about tech, and they didn't know better about climate change. We know better, or we're supposed to know better about climate change.
Why should I stay here? Why should I stay?
Right, so you're gonna ask me, like, what's the issue? I mean, the issue is that we weren't taught to design for climate change. It's a weird paradox because we're like trying to do bare minimum. Like we're locating ourselves between good intent, doing good enough, and no actual acceptance of what climate change actually means. See, the issue is if we wanted to design for mitigation, which is what we're doing now, like trying to mitigate climate change, minimize it as much as possible, that window closed way long before we were born, even before our parents were born. So what are we supposed to do? I mean, there's ways to deal with it, actually, surprisingly enough. But here's the issue. We still design with principles that were given to us by architects in one generation before. And I think that's the issue, is we have architecture that is supposed to last lifetimes, and we can't design it for a single lifetime anymore because everything changes so fast. Architecture is victim to this kind of lateness. It's always late to everything. We live and design in the aftermath. I don't even have to tell you about that. Like, everything is already done.
Because we live and design in the aftermath.
The policies that we use, the infrastructures that we've put in place, everything is not supposed to be there when you consider climate change. Realistically, we have like 3 options. First one is actually mitigating, which I don't know if we can actually do. Second one is adapting and trying to make the best of it. Third one is just kind of ignore everything and just keep suffering. Now, I don't know about you, but I'd like not to suffer. And what's weird is that we're convinced we can live out of our own water. Just think of AC. Just if you run your air conditioning, you're always making the outside hotter, which is a complete paradox. The more AC you use, the more AC you're going to have to use because of climate change. Every time you use AC, you're using electricity. Because of electricity usage, you're asking for more electricity production, and electricity production actually contributes to climate change. And then these want to colonize Mars? Okay, another issue is actually the way that we make ignorance. Just think about the tobacco industry in like the mid-50s, how everyone was like, oh, this is actually not a bad thing. And then everyone kept smoking. When in reality, now we know. Do you remember those ads? The issue is that in architecture, we're just not better. We're not better than the tobacco industry because we're cultivating ignorance when it comes to climate change. We're supposed to be the first front towards it. Here's a conundrum for you that I've been asking myself nonstop. If architecture is contributing to climate change and we're trying to make architecture that lasts lifetimes, what lifetimes are we designing for if we're contributing so much to climate change? We're just gonna kill everyone off, and then there's gonna be pretty ruins afterwards, right? Yeah, cool. Yeah, super cool. Here's another thing too, though. I'm more worried about the architects that think we know about climate change, that are like pandering solutionism, like they think they know the solution to everything. But it's not true. Jack of all trades, master of none, right? Let me just whip my hair again. It's getting a little ridiculous.
I'd be crazy not to follow.
It's like a mass delusion that we have, like a Dunning-Kruger effect. We think we're way smarter than we are. As architects, we're overconfident to the core that our education is enough. And honestly, I'll tell you, it isn't. Whether it's ignorance or intolerance, what I see is that the way that we describe the world just doesn't work. All right, let's talk about an alternative because that was depressing. Listen, so if we actually wanted a real alternative, first issue I'll tell you right now, it's humans are not at the center of everything. We keep pretending they are or not. We like to pretend that everything is a receptacle for our ideas. Not the case. Especially as architects, I'll tell you this much. We keep designing with products that leaves so much of the world out of view. We have no idea how a window even gets put together, which is wild. Where does that steel, where does that aluminum, where does that glass come from? That's not good. Even beyond that, the architecture profession being in two parts is not good either. We can't be builders and architects separate. What we're better off doing is going out into the world and actually modulating. Just being informed by the rocks and grass we find. That's actually what we should do. We should go out into the world and literally touch grass. Doesn't count, does it? On my way to touch grass. What I mean is, we might find ourselves happier by modulating the world and being modulated by it in return. It's these micro movements. You have to think about it as a dance. Because here's another thing. We tend to put the ugly stuff in the places we never see them. I mean, the Barcelona Pavilion is a great example of that. Like, the basement is where the offices are, all the maintenance stuff is, and above, it's supposed to be like this unreal garden that just exists because it exists. There's no way. Like, that thing was rebuilt, and all the broken stuff, they put downstairs. It's like a picture of Dorian Gray. It's like the pool is actually a mirror. So we keep the broken pieces downstairs, and it's supposed to be inaccessible for anyone except the people that work there. The whole thing pretends to be frozen in time when, how do they maintain it? You ever think about that? The whole thing can be explained with one little feline protagonist called La Gata Niebla.
This one. This is the cat Niebla.
La Gata Niebla was this little cat that used to hunt little mice and rats, because obviously modern architecture can't be modern with acknowledging mice and rats. Architecture with mice and rats is not architecture, right? As the guardian of this place against unwanted ecosystems, La Gata Niebla became blind. After hunting mice for so long and living in the basement, she got accustomed to not staring at the sun. So then eventually she just lost her eyesight. Just like I am right now.
Living in the sunlight, loving in the moonlight, having a wonderful time.
The Barcelona Pavilion wasn't meant to be experimented with or modulated. It exists as a perfect still frame of a bygone era that we can't live in anymore. Otherwise, we'll all end up blind like La Gata Niebla, and most of us are already blind. What we've become blind to is the black box of modernism. What I'm advocating for is literally to follow wood. Look at this. Tell me all your secret. Because the thing is, before that wood was in there, as just the facade of that building, before any of that, it was a tree. Just like this one. Look at that. Tree. But before even that, it was a sapling. Tiny little guy. It takes years to do that. And you can imagine that between being a tree and being planks of wood on the side of a building, a lot of shit happens. I used to love watching how it's made. You could actually start learning how things get done. And even if you were to take some wood and try to do this, you still have to follow the grain, the hardness. Like, you actually need to figure out what the wood is saying about its own existence. Wood, like any other material, lives through a whole journey before getting here, and it's going to live an entire journey once it's done being here. And we don't question that as architects. That's what we should be designing. We shouldn't be designing the way that it looks here. We should be designing where it comes from, where it goes.
Where did you come from? Where did you go?
Follow where you lead. You're right.
That's why now I live in rural places. There's a much more direct relationship with everything that I do. And I'm not saying it's the only way to do this. So don't reach for your pistols just yet. The next issue we have is abstraction. Abstraction is fundamentally a violent process because you're trying to describe the world with very fundamental forms. But it doesn't actually work that way because you have to cut and chop.
Abstraction means a process of taking out. Therefore, abstraction is a process through which man seeks to define generic frameworks rather than specific solution.
But in architecture, we do that with the way that we describe the world. The way that we need to describe the world is far more literal. But it's the same thing with the Roman Empire. If you look at the Pantheon, right? That big bubble with the hole on top, the floor of the Pantheon was essentially a map for the entirety of the Roman Empire. Because you had marble from all the corners of the Roman Empire, so that they could actually tell what the geological basis was from all of their territories, which is crazy to me. And it's a trophy. It's a trophy of conquest. It's a trophy of being able to say that we own that territory, which is crazy to me. And it's just kind of weird that that map on the floor of the Pantheon ends up being an abstraction. It doesn't describe the entire territory. It doesn't even start describing what it's like. And that is the violence of abstraction. You're not actually describing the people that live there.
They turn me.
What we don't acknowledge is that architecture is like a river. We know it that way because it changes. It keeps moving. Those materials have an ebb and flow to them. They start out one way, they get transformed, they become another. The third problem with the way that we describe the world right now is this awful impression of stability. That's because our model to describe this stability is one based on boundless growth. Just everything, year over year, profit, gain, more, addition, can't do that forever. We will, in fact, have to experience degrowth within the next several decades. There's no ifs or buts, it's just gonna happen. But even degrowth doesn't have to be construed as grim. I mean, it is, because it implies even the blunt loss of human life. But maybe there's a way to adapt to it. There may be a way to put breakdown, decay, and aging inside our own systems, and from there, try to design based on decay and breakdown. Just to be clear though, it's not about fixing what's outright broken, because some things are just not meant to be fixed. But in this mode of thinking, we're not thinking about objects. We're only thinking about states and modulations, but we can figure out a system that works when things break down. And that might be a first step.
Follow to the edge of the earth.
Actually, what you need to know is that cities are in the business of unbuilding. To make new buildings, you actually have to take away from one side to bring it to the other side. What that means is the primary business of a city is actually to take away from other places.
But we also know that buildings themselves destroy other buildings.
So one of the arguments is that we can actually start unbuilding what's in the city already to reassemble and modulate already on site, which is way more interesting to me, instead of taking away from landscapes like these, you know? The fourth and final attribute of this mode of thinking is actually acknowledging that all of this that we have around us, like our architecture, depends on a massive injection of energy, massive injection of hydrocarbon fuels, and that's not sustainable by definition. Living this way also means that we are literally covered in oil. And beyond actually trying to blow up a pipeline, which I urge you to do, try to blow up your own pipeline. Try to blow up the way that you think about the world and your even educational pipeline, because there's stuff that doesn't work in there.
Everybody leaves.
And honestly, we have to start with how we produce architecture. There's no other way. That's the office and that's school.
Fix the office. Contemporary education holds the keys to many answers, yet it is plagued with the same issues that precludes the entire industry from changing.
But in the end, that's the lesson. Instead of designing and putting your ideas into matter, try to modulate the world.
Get out, engage and modulate literal things, places, and systems.
With our current model, we're doing trade-offs. We're taking away from future generations to do now, which is kind of selfish, I'm not gonna lie. We just owe ourselves, especially as younger practitioners, a better way to describe the world, a better way of designing, a better way of thinking about the way that we design. Future's now, old man.
Future's now, old man.
It's time to go for a swim.
I just wanted to say thanks. I'm glad you came along, partner.
Weird fishes.